Thanks for joining this webinar as part of a series of webinars on data visibility. I'm Martin Zerbib. I'm Head of Solutions Engineering at Sifflet, and I'd like to introduce the main speaker for today, which is Callum, an analytics engineer at Adaptavist. I will talk about how Adaptavist leverages Matillion, Snowflake, and Sifflet as part of their data stack and the value they've gotten from that.
Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Callum, so analytics engineer at Adaptavist. I've been at Adaptavist for I think about a year now. We've completely revolutionized our stack in the past year, completely changed things up. And so yeah, I'm going to talk to you today about our data as a product program, how it's kind of really empowered people at Adaptavist, and also some data contracts work, which is a very hot new term. So kind of excited to share with you how we do that here.
Callum starts sharing his slides. I'd like to note that if you have any questions, do not hesitate to use the Q&A section section of the interface, or just write a comment in the comment section. So don't hesitate to ask any questions. We will address those questions at the end of the session. All right.
Nice one. Cool. Thank you very much, Martin. So yeah, just to dive in very briefly to Adaptavist, the Adaptavist group, what we do. So we are Platinum Partners solution experts, primarily on the Atlassian marketplace. So we design, sell apps and add-ons on the Atlassian marketplace, and we also perform ITSM services. So these are some of our brands that you might have seen. So we design, sell apps through these brands, ScriptRunner being our biggest ones. And we also sell services through these brands, so migration projects, general kind of business architecture. We also have some of our partners where we kind of work very closely with, again, designing and selling apps, either using them, through them, or alongside them. And same things with architecture design, cloud migration services, things like that. So all of that to say, basically, we've got a lot of data coming from a lot of places. We don't really know what this data means sometimes. Like, we have so many people asking for it, but it's basically locked behind all of these superficial barriers, I guess, like having to understand different languages, getting set up on systems, and generally just kind of being very able to manipulate and understand data. So we kind of have a bit of a problem where we have all this data, it's locked behind all this potential, or the potential is locked behind all these barriers, and people are asking for it all the time. We want that information now, we want it faster. The thing is, this is not just a technology problem, it's a people and process problem, right? Like, we're really good at tech. Like, we have, petabytes of information that we can just store pretty cheaply, access it more or less when we want. Technology's there. It's just, how we implement it is kind of the bit that we're trying to get over now. So in the data world, we've kind of heard these terms of data producers, data consumers. Most people think this is companies or software. So Atlassian would be a data producer, and Adaptavists are the data consumers, consuming this event data. But actually, you can go way more granular than that. You can think of data producers as teams, such as a data engineering team, and then the consumer being the analytics team. You can think of the analytics team being the producer and the stakeholders being the consumers, looking at data and dashboards. So you kind of have these two different personas, and we live in these two completely different worlds, right? So producers all about architecture, design, code, security, getting the data available to the consumers. The consumers are the ones who apply the business logic. We're trying to make understanding hypotheses from this data, trying to make money, trying to make growth, forge new relationships. Data drives decisions, but data is only as good as the story that you tell with it. So we have these two different personas living in two different worlds, and it's just not scalable. It doesn't even work half the time. We have this barrier down the middle between the two of us, where data producers are making these design specs from like very ambiguous kind of specifications, throwing this data to the consumers. The consumers don't really know what to do with this data, or it's not quite met the specifications because they haven't been explicit enough. And essentially, it's no one's fault. It's just the fact that we have these two worlds. Our roles aren't really aligned. We're using different lingo or trying to use each other's lingo, and it just gets lost in translation. And there's no shared tooling, like there's so many different things you have to understand or install or get to speed on in order to understand both sides of these personas. So how do we unblock and empower people? So I'm going to pretend there are like 4 key Infinity Stones. I know there's like 6, but I don't want to get sued by Marvel, and there's only really 4 things we need for this. But basically, we need access to production data. It's a really simple concept, right? Just access to the data, but sometimes that can be kind of difficult. But yeah, that's basically point number 1. We need a low-code method of transforming the data. This is all to do with unblocking and empowering the non-coders, the people who don't know all these different languages, or don't want to get set up on all these different platforms. We need a way to visualize that data and share it with the wider business. Again, data is only as powerful as the story you tell with it. And then finally, data literacy and observability. So I'd say in the last 3 to 5 years, observability and data has kind of been a hot topic again. And it's really starting to get noticed, which is super, super important. So these kind of 4 key concepts we have packaged up, and we call it DAP, or data as a product. So this is the big hero statement that we are calling DAP at Adaptavist. In the relay race of empowering people with data, DAP is the baton we're handing to you. So you can think of this as not kind of palming off our work, but basically saying, look, you're a data consumer, you're asking us for all these things, these dashboards, these metrics, change this, change that, and it's just not scalable, right? So we're going to hand you this baton, which is all of these different tools, these packages, and it just unblocks you. So we are no longer the bottleneck, and you can kind of make decisions faster yourself using your data. So as I mentioned, DAP is a complete package of products that enable you to self-serve data that drives decision-making. So we've got 4 main products: Snowflake, Matillion, QuickSight, and Sifflet. So just kind of like dive into each of those now. So access to production data, we're using Snowflake. It's real-time access to prod data with no contention. So sometimes in data architecture, we have like shared disk, or we can do shared nothing. Snowflake have combined the best parts of both. So it's like a hybrid model between the 2 of those, which is what gives this zero contention stuff. So people have their own warehouses, or you can share a dedicated warehouse for a dedicated purpose. And it can do like multi-threading and queuing. So it's literally, there's never been any downtime pretty much with Snowflake. You can also add new users at no cost. So if people want access to this prod data, we just give them a user. They have all of the permissions, the roles, the warehouses they need to just start querying in SQL straight away. Super, super fast and cheap. Talking about the architecture a little bit more. So on our left-hand side, we have our layers. You can think of layers as a segment, a repo, or a database where stuff is happening with that data. So starting at the bottom, we have landing. This is just straight up JSON, just from our data producers, from data engineering or Atlassian or HubSpot, just straight in, no manipulation or business logic at all. Moving up, it goes to prep. So we flatten it and we do some upserts. So when like a new record comes in, we kind of just change that to be the latest record whilst keeping the old one. Source, this is where our business logic is applied. So we start doing metrics, we start defining what a customer is, and that's harder, easier said than done for sure. And then we have presentation, which is where we open up that database to a BI platform. We use QuickSight. And this is like the Kimball models. And we also experimented with some data vaults as well. So we actually cherry pick at each of these layers what we want to expose to our data consumers, to DAP customers. So the way we do this is with data contracts, which I'll talk about in just a bit. But these are essentially views that sit on top of specific tables we have decided to pick out. And we push that into a DAP database. So DAP users just get access to that. And it's in one of 3 schemas: flattened. So this is just usually stuff from prep. It's just raw data in a tabular format. You can do whatever logic and aggregations you want on that. Processed. So this is where we've applied business logic, mostly coming from source or presentation. So we'll have a script from an events table, or a customers table, or a licenses table, some kind of manipulations going on. And then shared resources is just your generic table, like date tables, fiscal dates, conversion rates, stuff like that. So it's like nice, neatly packaged. So data consumers can go to one place, the DAP database. They can see all the data that they can use if they want. And it's all enforced with data contracts as well, rather than having to sift through our entire stack and work out what data they need. So Low-code transformation, we use Matillion. This is really good for like on-the-fly transformation and building at the speed of thought. So it doesn't use SQL. You can use SQL components if you'd like, but it's essentially a drag and drop GUI. So people who don't know code can still manipulate the data. They can still make data pipelines, even if they don't know the built-in pipelines themselves. It's really, really good for collaboration. You know, people can pick up different projects without having to understand the logic necessarily. They just follow the pipeline. And the last point, so POCs can be productionized, so proof of concept can be productionized, but they don't have to be production ready. So this is an example of a productionized but not production ready pipeline. It basically generates a report of North American licenses, and depending on what filter settings you want in QuickSight, it can show you different parts of that report. So it could be licenses that aren't managed by Adaptavist, licenses with an upcoming renewal within the next 12 months. And this basically feeds into sales. This was whipped up in a couple of days, and then we transferred it over to the cloud version of Matillion in a couple of hours. It's super, super easy, just drag and drop. Doesn't live in production. It's got a schedule, so it will run every single day. But there's no code, there's no one really maintaining it other than like myself who built it and the stakeholder. And there's just a lot of cross collaboration. Like things changed all the time, but it's just a case of explaining to the stakeholder what we can do and how we do it. Cool. So data visualization, again, so we got that manipulated data. Now we want to present it. We use QuickSight, but we have the term or BYOBI. So rather than bring your own booze, it's bring your own BI. We have DAP customers using Google Sheets, Looker Studio, QuickSight. We don't really care what you use. We don't want to be a blocker. We give you QuickSight, a license to make whatever you want in that, but you can use anything you want. The key part here is that Snowflake is the central hub where all the data is stored. Matillion sits on the side and does a read and write back into Snowflake, and then Snowflake exposes that to whatever BI platform you want. That's the kind of key concept we were pushing with this. So, Sifflet. This is how we support data literacy. So, I think the thing about data is it's hard to define a customer or a. Sorry, I just need to cough for 1 second. The flu is coming my way. So yeah, as I was saying, with data, it's hard to define one thing across all of your data stack. So what is a customer? Well, if you ask finance, if you ask sales, if you ask marketing, they all say completely different things. So this is how we kind of define. Sorry, 1 second. The flu is coming. So, what was I? 1 second.
I think it's the Sifflu. Terrible pun.
I can feel it in my
while you're recovering. I thought I had to. Yeah.
1 second, sorry. Oh, it's coming for me. I can feel it. Okay, so there we go. So yeah, defining defining data in context of that part of the business is really, really difficult. So Sifflet makes it easy because we have, I'll show you in a minute, domains, tags, business glossary terms. All of this is defined at the tabular level, at the data contract level, which really, really helps kind of define the data that you're looking at. So with another thing with Sifflet is we have asset lineage, so you can see where the data comes from. And all of this is enforced in data contracts. All right, there we go. Got my flow back. So really wise man, Heraclitus, once says that change is the only constant. The thing is, we are really, really bad at it. Like data teams especially, something changes and everything breaks, everything falls over, right? So we have some quotes, some more recent quotes, which I'll bring up on the big screen, my side. So Chad Sanderson, CEO and co-founder of Gable, says, "My belief is that data contracts are the key to building a production-grade data warehouse and breaking the silo between data producers and data consumers." So Chad Sanderson has been an advocate for data contracts for a long, long time. And Gable actually is a startup where it's all about implementing data contracts at the data between data consumers and data producers. So it's a brand new thing, so expect to see good things from them. And then the other one that was from Andrew Jones, principal engineer at GoCardless, sometimes referred to as the father of data contracts. So he says, to empower a truly data-driven organization, we need to move away from the dependence on a central and limited data engineering team to an architecture that promotes autonomy. That's from his new book, really good book. Definitely recommend it. So I think I actually steal some quotes from him next, which I'm just gonna full on use. So one of the best analogies for data contracts is that they act as APIs for your data. And this is the definition of a data contract here. So this definition is essentially 4 principles, right? So it's just an agreed interface between the generators of data and those who consume it. You're setting the expectations around that data and defining how it should be governed. That's a really critical point. And then lastly, it's facilitating the explicit generation of that quality data. So 4 key principles of a data contract. So just to talk about the scope of Adaptavist data contract, essentially what we're doing here is we're giving table and column descriptions. We're giving tags and business glossary terms. So what I said earlier about defining the customer, really powerful in Sifflet, because you can have a tag or a business glossary term called customer, and that will change depends on what asset you're looking at, because it can be different things across your data stacks. That's really important. You're defining owners, you're defining data types, and you're defining the cadence of that data. Alongside this, we've got a load of monitoring. So we've got table monitors. This is like freshness, completeness, schema drift, so things at the tabular level. And then we can go down to the column level. This is looking for duplicates, nulls, cardinality, and things like that. Cool. So how we implement this is essentially coming from 2 different sources. So we have DBT as our main kind of foundation for the data contract, so SQL and YAML files. And then we use custom tests and business definitions from a developer and Sifflet, and we kind of host this all in our Sifflet platform. Right. So this is an example of a SQL model in DBT. So at the very top, we have a config block. So this is where we kind of define how it's materialized, the schema it goes in, and some tags. And we're also defining what columns we want to bring in from the data source, the data type, and just essentially kind of very superficial things like that. And then the YAML file, this is where we define all of the intricacies. So we have the owner, the descriptions, and then we have some tests as well. DBT has some great out-of-the-box tests, like unique and not null, and also relationship tests. So this column should have licenses which also appear in this column in that table, and it will flag if it doesn't, some kind of inconsistency there. So once we have all of that ran in DBT, we upload the JSON documents that DBT produces. We can do this through the CLI as one-offs. And then we also have Airflow. These will run those tests every day, every hour, whatever cadence we like. It will run those and then upload those to Sifflet as well. So the other side of it, the custom stuff, the developer built tests. This is an example of just some custom SQL, very simple, that we've made in, I think it was just a script that we've then put into Snowflake as a monitor. And then Sifflet has some really cool kind of dynamic and smart monitors. So this one I think is completeness. So whenever the number of rows ingested falls outside of a boundary, it can like flag to us that something's gone wrong. This boundary can be high, it can be low, and we can go in and we can mark it as false positives or expected, which will kind of train the algorithm to adjust those boundaries. Cool. And then this is the business terms in context of the data. So we've got definitions here of a data contract, direct revenue, what a SEN is, and these definitions can change, depends on what asset we decide to apply them to. 1 second. Cool. So this altogether comes into a data contract in Sifflet. So this is kind of the homepage. This is where you get to see some immediate information about the data asset, about the data contracts, like the descriptions, the columns involved, and the data types. You can actually go into those columns and you can see the descriptions of each different column, the tags that have been applied, the business terms, and the data type. Data quality, super important. So is this contract, is it being breached by the data producer? What's the quality of this data? How is it being monitored? And then lastly, asset lineage. I think this is a really cool screenshot because you can actually see upstream, we have some incidents. So we have some monitors set up on the raw data, or the process data, and it says something's wrong. We have a data contract in the middle, and then what is produced in the DAP database on the far right. And you can actually see the health of that view in the DAP database is all clear, it's all green. So this is an example of where a data contract has actually stopped either bad data from getting to the customer, or it's just proven to ourselves that we've not breached the contract. So some of our upstream tests can be super, super rigorous. And it might be that actually we've agreed with the data consumer that we're not going to test for this, or you know what, if we receive a later arriving file, that's not going to be in breach of the contract. So this is kind of how we keep ourselves accountable, but also prove to the customers that we are producing this data in lines with the contract. Cool. So what's next? Well, we're really, really excited to be partnering with Gable as a POC, proof of concept. So we're going to kind of implement landing layer contracts. So these are the raw data coming from data engineering, so from Atlassian, and kind of implement data contracts at that level. These contracts work slightly differently than the ones we have in Sifflet, and we kind of see them working in tandem together. This is less to do with the quality of the data being produced and more to do with any breaking changes. So when a PR is raised, Gable can check the output of that PR and test it against the data contract to see if that PR will break anything downstream. That's kind of what we're going for. It's the PR level. We can also kind of foster shared ownership between data producers and consumers. Once we have these agreements in place of like, this is what we will provide you, and we're going to agree on that together, you have shared ownership on something. It's no one's single person's fault. Okay. We also want to leverage Sifflet's monitor as code feature. So I'm super excited about this. Hopefully I get some time next year to experiment with it. These are essentially those hand-coded monitors that I showed you before with the custom SQL and the completeness. They can all be defined in YAML files. So we can actually make this in a DBT repo. We can apply them to the data contracts we're making in that DBT repo. We can apply them, we can check them for PRs. So when a PR is made, made for like a new data asset, we can check, do an auto check to see if it has one of these YAML file monitors, which is really cool. And then lastly, we kind of want to implement data contracts at every single point in our data stack. So again, about going super granular between data consumers and data producers. We want every single layer to be a producer and the next layer down to be a consumer. This basically means everything becomes like dappable, you know, because everything has a contract, so everything can be exposed to another customer, whether that be the next layer down or an external team. It doesn't matter, but that's going to be super exciting. And one of our architecture kind of things we have at Adaptavist is that we use poly repos. So this means that if we'll have multiple repos for different processes, so landing, prep, source, things like that. Sometimes you can get a CI check which passes in that repo. So your change in this repo won't break anything in this repo, but there's no real way of testing it downstream. Whereas if we have data contracts, we can actually test to make sure that the output of that layer doesn't breach anything that could be consuming from it. So just one final note on data contracts and DAP and everything like that. Change isn't easy. I think we're really lucky at Adaptavist where we embrace change. We're always keen to try new things. But I think company culture can sometimes push against change, especially if it's a new term like a data contract, or people don't see the immediate benefit in data contracts. Sometimes they say no news is good news, but that kind of gets overlooked all the time. Data contracts should, in theory, mean there'll be nothing going wrong in a data stack. So there's no news happening, everything's just flowing, but people don't often see the benefit in that. So I think company culture could technically be the biggest hurdle to get over. Cool, I think that's me done. I'm gonna go chug a load of water right now. If there are any questions, I'm happy to field those.
Yeah, so please use the comment section of the Q&A to ask any questions. While you take a load of sip of water, Callum, I have a bit of a question, right? So I think one of the things, a contract is kind of ensuring that both people are meeting kind of the agreement, because both sides are meeting the contract. Producers are ensuring that the data is of quality that they provide to the consumer. Do you ever really expose kind of some of the tests that you're doing to the consumer? And do you ever ask the consumer for kind of input as to whether something is actually wrong or correct as part of that flow?
Yeah, so a few points to touch on there. We're really good with transparency at Adaptavist. So everyone has access to the Sifflet by default if they want to be a DAP customer. So they can kind of go in, they'll select a domain, say in data contracts, and they can see all the assets they can have a look at. And you can see by default the quality of those. On top of this, we have dedicated Slack channels for different groups and different assets. So we have one for Bamboo HR, for example, our HR system. We're gonna have a load of monitors set up on that, and that'll be going to a dedicated Slack channel, which will ping if something's wrong. And it's really good because it kind of puts the ownership on HR to fix something. If a monitor says, hey, like this email is incorrect, or something, we've got a duplicate record, it's actually not the data producer's responsibility, us, to go fix it. It's actually them. They can go into the HR system and fix things, which is really good. So that's kind of how we implement, I guess, the communication piece. In terms of coming together and deciding what's best, that's exactly what we do. We basically meet up with people and we just say, what do you want to monitor? What are your key kind of checks you want to do? We recommend this from a data perspective, but from your non-data perspective, what's important to you? And it's just that collaboration piece again of the two personas, just coming together and trying to find shared ground.
Yeah. Is there a process to kind of promote? You mentioned you had some existing tests that were maybe like too strict or too specific and didn't necessarily affect the contract. Is there like a process to promote some of these tests when they become really relevant into the actual contract itself?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we've all heard the term like alert fatigue, and sometimes we get monitors which are constantly pinging, and that's not a good sign. We shouldn't have monitors on that. It's something else we need to do. And other times, we do have monitors that go off that are super critical, and we think actually, yeah, we should probably include that in the contract. A lot of the time, these sit really far upstream, so it doesn't really even matter if it's in the contract or not, because if it fails upstream, it's not going to reach the contract. We'll stop it at that layer. But I think this is one of those ongoing processes, right, where you just keep on reviewing things.
Yeah, makes sense. I have another question actually. So as part of kind of, it sounds like you've kind of built really like a really decent stack, right? You've like started, with Matillion kind of on premise, you moved to the cloud, you've added the GPT, you kind of migrated into Snowflake as well. Is there anything that you would change or you wish you had done earlier or known before you kind of started on this kind of process and migration?
I think sounds a bit cheesy, but we were the victim of our own success in terms of DAP. We tried to release it as a soft launch, as a small kind of concept and very early build, but everyone wanted it. So all of a sudden we had all of these stakeholders wanting to get their hands on data. I think we only had like a couple of data contracts at the time. Mm-hmm. So I think hindsight's great, right? Like, go back and have more time and be more prepared for it. But I think advice to those who are looking at doing something similar, if you are in a data-driven company or a technical company, because everyone here are super technical, and you're giving them data for the first time, everyone's going to want it. Take the time to actually build a solid platform, get some more people hours on it because it was just me basically doing this, and anticipate a huge launch. Worst comes to the worst, or worst outcome is that you're just over prepared, which is a lot better than being under prepared and everyone now wanting a piece of you.
Was there ever the temptation of just providing data that didn't really, have a contract associated or didn't have the quality checks behind it?
Yeah, 100%. So we kind of have these two user groups called, so we have standard DApp users and power users in DApp. Power users can see the underlying data tables that don't have data contracts. So the diagram I showed before where we cherry pick from each layer, power users can see behind those. So as a result, we've basically onboarded everyone as a power user because we just don't have enough time or resources to make data contracts for everything. And people they want all the data, right? So we've just kind of onboarded everyone's power users.
Yeah, and I guess like maybe one thing I've seen personally quite a lot is like potentially, and this is why it's important to have those contracts and those quality checks, is potentially when you deliver data that's actually not really healthy or being, checked and sanitized and correct, potentially what you're driving is potentially a drop in trust in that data. Is that something you've experienced, before you kind of set out on this endeavor as well, where people were saying, okay, this data is great, but I'm starting to lose faith in it or trust in it because it doesn't look like it's actually holding up to, what eventually will become a contract?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had it many times before where you've had tickets come in from stakeholders saying this dashboard looks wrong. Here's kind of a few things I can see what's wrong with it, but there's probably other things. And even us, the data team, go in and it's like, yep, we can't verify any of these figures, like we don't know what's going on here. This was one of the problems with our old stack where there's nothing really wrong with it at the time. It's just where we exploded, and demand became very, very high. Like it just couldn't kind of keep up. And the technical overhead was huge. So there was a big loss of trust in our data, which was unfortunate. But part of this new stack and this whole redesign is not just about making things a bit more scalable and a bit more tuned to our new kind of business pattern. It's also about rebuilding that trust, right? Like sometimes it's a psychological thing saying, look, come over here, everything's new and we're building it differently. This data you can trust. Yeah. You can fix the old platform, right? We could do that, but sometimes people perceptions is harder to change.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually. Cool. Well, I think I don't have any other questions, and there were no extra questions on top of the ones I asked in the chat. So I think we might be able to wrap it up a bit earlier than expected, but that's actually been a really insightful session, Callum. I think that was really interesting. I think the concept of data contracts is something that a lot of people have, approached or, read about, but seeing it actually, being implemented in practice and how that actually drives the data engineering process, I think is very interesting because it's something to know about, but actually implementing it is something that we don't see nearly, as much as we should. So it's been great. Thank you very much, Callum. It was a very insightful session, and hopefully you recover from your Sif flu too.
I want to go pop a load of Lemsip right now because
that's good.
But yeah, I thoroughly agree. I think you don't see data contracts that often implemented. I think it's going to be a huge space in the next couple of years. So stay tuned.
Cool. All right.
This one.
Thanks, Callum. Have a nice one. And thanks everybody for joining this meeting. Okay.
Bye.